Hello, and welcome to a short video on how to conduct a 2x2 between subjects ANOVA in SPSS. Now you'll notice my dataset is set up correctly for a between subjects analysis of variance. So we have two independent variables or factors and one dependent variable. The dependent variable is on an interval scale, so we have a range of scores, and the independent variables are in groups. We can see we have two groups for independent variable 1 and two groups, I've called them conditions to make it clear, for independent variable 2. You can have more than two groups for each of these, but to make it a two-way we have two factors or two independent variables. Obviously in your data you'll probably name these the actual variables or conditions or grouping variables in your study, and these would represent the different groups or conditions, but this is just to make you clear of how to conduct the analysis in SPSS. So I have in this case a 2x2 because there are two groups in IV1 and two conditions in IV2, so it's a 2x2 design, but it could be a 2x3 if there was three conditions in IV2 in the second factor, or any variation on that. So to run the two-way ANOVA, you click on Analyze, Generate Linear Model, or Univariate. So our dependent variable moves into our box of dependent variables, and then we put our fixed factors. These are our factors or independent variables in the language of the design that we're doing. So I'm going to click on some options, and I'm going to have some means for each of these scores and the interaction between those. So just to show that this 2x2, it will look at a main effect for factor 1, in this case IV1, a main effect for factor 2, in this case IV2, and the interaction between factor 1 and factor 2. So is there a difference between those two groups in factor 1? Is there a difference between those two conditions in factor 2? And does the impact of the group and conditions interact on the dependent variable in this interaction effect? So I'm going to put some descriptives and estimates of effect size. I don't need to do post hocs because I only have two groups or two conditions, and so therefore if I find a main effect of factor 1 or a main effect of factor 2, then I just need to look at the mean scores to see which of those groups is higher than the other group. If there was an interaction effect, I might need to explore that a bit further, either through some one-way ANOVAs or redoing the analysis separately for each of those groups or conditions. So I also want to do a plot. Now in this case I don't actually know what the data, what the results are, so I'm going to do two plots, one which has IV1 on the horizontal lines and separate lines for IV2, and one which has the reverse, IV1 on the horizontal lines and IV2 on the horizontal lines and IV1 as separate lines. And then I can look at both of those and decide which one of those I think represents the scores or the data better. So I'm going to continue with that and then click on OK. What we'll notice from my outcome here, my output here, is that the first table just tells me my groupings. So IV1 has two groups, which are just group 1 and group 2 with 20 people in each. IV2 has two groups, I've called them conditions, with 20 people in each. And this gives me the mean score, some descriptive statistics for each of those by each of the variables separately. So group 1, those participants in group 1 and condition 1 have got a mean of 3.6. Those participants in group 1, condition 2, etc., etc. And this is standard deviation and their scores. So it's worth just thinking about the data. So each participant is in a different group and condition. So we've got 10 participants in group 1. 10 participants in group 1 and condition 1, 10 participants in group 1 and condition 2, 10 participants in group 2 and condition 1, and 10 participants in group 2 and condition 2. So really we get 4 separate cells or 4 separate groups in this kind of design. Obviously if there are more conditions or groups, that will be a larger number. So back to the output. We've got the descriptive statistics, so we can begin looking at that to see if there's anything going on in the data overall. Then we have our main 2x2 ANOVA table. So we're not really interested in these first two rows there. So we're also not interested in that total row. So we can see here, this first row is there an impact of factor 1 or IV1? If we look at significance, that's not significant, doesn't demonstrate a large effect. If we look at is there a main effect of factor 2, we can see there is. Factor 2 is significant, so that suggests that there is a difference between those two groups in terms of their average score. They're significantly different between them. And is there an interaction effect? And this shows that there isn't an interaction effect between IV1 and IV2. So this difference in terms of IV2 between those conditions is not dependent on which group you are in. So there is no interaction there. So we've got I asked for some descriptive statistics here. So we know that this factor here is significant, so we look down at IV2 and we can see here the difference between those two scores is significant. Condition 2 is significantly higher than condition 1. This group here is not significant and there's no interaction between these scores. So IV2 is significantly different from condition 1 and condition 2 are significantly different. So on this chart it shows those as separate lines, condition 2 being this green line, so you can see it's higher for both of those group 1 and group 2. There's no real difference between group 1 and group 2 on either this one or on this one here. The second one separates condition 1 and condition 2 along the bottom with separate lines for IV1. I don't think this shows the scores quite as neatly, so I'd probably use this first one in terms of representing the data, because this demonstrates that the difference between those two lines is bigger and there's no real difference between, if you like, the straightness of the lines. This one looks quite different but doesn't come up in the interaction. So that's how you run a 2x2 analysis of variance for a between subjects design.